The Interstellar Academy of Higher Learning is a beacon of knowledge in the universe, a place where the brightest minds from countless species gather to learn, compete, and innovate. The Academy is housed in a vast floating city orbiting a distant star. It's an engineering marvel, with clusters of spiky spires connected by gleaming bridges and corridors. Gravity is variable, and time can be bent to meet the learning needs of different species. Among these towering figures, a little girl named Sarah Mitchell stands out, not for her age but for her unique presence. At just 9 years old, Sarah is thrust into this strange new world as the only human among powerful aliens, each more majestic and mysterious than the last. Her arrival sparks curiosity, suspicion, and even a bit of contempt among her peers. Humans, after all, are considered a primitive species, physically weak and technologically backward. Yet here she is, a child among giants, standing on the precipice of the Academy's most challenging academic trial, the Galactic Puzzle Tournament. The tournament is a sacred tradition designed to push the cognitive limits of the Academy's students. It's not just about solving puzzles. It's about doing so in record time, under enormous pressure, and in front of the entire school. These puzzles are crafted by the Thark, a race of feline humanoids known for their unparalleled intelligence and sharp reflexes. Professor Zeeler, the head of the department, is the undisputed master of these puzzles, and it is his designs that await the students participating in the competition. Sarah's first day at the Academy was overwhelming. The sheer size of the place, the diversity of students, and the advanced technology that permeated every aspect of life were almost too much to take in. But she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement as she walked the halls. It was a place where she could truly challenge her intellect and push herself to her limits. And if there's one thing Sarah loves, it's a good challenge. Her dorm room was a small, Spartan affair with a bed adjusted to her body's needs, a desk that served as a holographic interface, and a window offering a breathtaking view of space. Sarah spent her first night unpacking and sorting through the personal belongings she had brought, mostly books and a few souvenirs from Earth. As she looked out the window, seeing the nebulae swirling in the distance, she felt a pang of homesickness, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She was here for a reason, and she wouldn't let anything stop her. The next morning, Sarah found herself in a large, circular classroom surrounded by students of all shapes and sizes. Silent anticipation filled the room as they awaited the arrival of Professor Zeeler, a legend at the Academy. Zeeler was known for his stern demeanor and unrelenting standards. Standing over 7 feet tall with sleek silver fur and piercing yellow eyes, he exuded an aura of authority. His movements were as graceful as a predator's as he took his place at the center of the room, his tail swishing rhythmically behind him. Today, Zeeler's deep, rumbling voice filled the room. "We will prepare for the Galactic Puzzle Championship," he began. "This is not a challenge for the faint of heart. It is a test of sharpness, speed, and adaptability. Only the best will succeed." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Sarah could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some curious, some judging. She knew what they were thinking. How could a human, and such a young one, even be part of this competition? But Sarah didn't let their doubts affect her. She was here to prove herself, and nothing was going to get in her way. Zeeler began the lesson by presenting a series of increasingly complex puzzles, each a holographic structure floating in the air before the students. The puzzles were multidimensional, requiring the solver to manipulate them in ways that defied conventional logic. Sarah watched intently as her classmates tackled the puzzles, their hands moving swiftly as they rotated and focused on the structures, searching for solutions. When it was Sarah's turn, she stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The puzzle that appeared before her was a glowing jumble of lines and shapes that shifted and changed as she looked at it. To an untrained eye, it was a chaotic mess, but for Sarah, it was something entirely else. She could see the patterns, the hidden logic governing the movements of the pieces. Her hands moved quickly and precisely, almost automatically, manipulating the puzzle pieces. Within seconds, the lines and shapes clicked into place, forming a perfect geometric design. There was a brief silence, followed by a murmur of surprise from the other students. Even Zeeler raised an eyebrow, a rare display of emotion from the stoic professor. "Well done," he said with a hint of admiration in his voice. But this is only the beginning. As time passed, the competition grew more challenging, and Sarah threw herself into her studies, honing her skills and preparing for the tournament. She spent hours in the Academy's vast library, studying ancient texts and practicing with state-of-the-art puzzle simulators. The more she learned, the more confident she became. But with that confidence came both expected and unwanted attention. A few students approached her, curious about the human girl who seemed to possess extraordinary abilities. Some even asked for her help with their studies, which Sarah gladly provided. But others were less kind, students who saw her as a threat or a curiosity to be mocked. Sarah tried to ignore them, focusing on her work, but it wasn't always easy. One day, as Sarah was leaving the library, she encountered a group of older students. Their leader, a tall, muscular boy with sharp features, stepped forward, blocking her path. "So you're the one everyone's talking about," he taunted. "Think you're so smart." Sarah stood her ground, meeting his gaze. "I'm just here to learn," she replied calmly. "Isn't that what we're all here for?" The boy sneered. "Learning? You think you can compete with us? You're nothing but a weakling. You don't belong here." Sarah felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I may be human," she said, "but that doesn't mean I can't keep up." The boy's expression faltered for a moment, but then he laughed, a harsh sound. "This place will chew you up and spit you out," he said before turning and walking away, his friends following close behind. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She couldn't let them get to her. She had to stay focused. She had to prove them wrong. The day of the Galactic Puzzle Championship arrived sooner than Sarah had expected. The entire academy buzzed with excitement, students and teachers alike eagerly anticipating the event. The competition was held in the Great Hall, a vast chamber with a vaulted ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls were lined with holographic screens, each displaying a different view of the arena below. As Sarah entered the hall, she felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. She looked around, seeing competitors from various species, each representing the best their world had to offer. At the center of it all, the first puzzle appeared, a rotating, glowing cube covered in intricate patterns. Sarah watched as the other competitors quickly began to solve the puzzle, their hands flying over the controls. She turned her focus inward, her mind working furiously to find a solution. The cube twisted and turned under her touch, the patterns shifting and changing with every move. But Sarah was in the zone, her mind completely focused. Within moments, the puzzle clicked into place, and she moved on to the next round. Round after round, the puzzles grew more complex and more challenging, but Sarah didn't falter. Her hands moved with lightning speed, and her mind processed information faster than she thought possible. As she solved each puzzle, she could feel the eyes of the audience on her and hear the murmurs of surprise and admiration, but she didn't let it distract her. She was here to win, and nothing else mattered. Finally, after hours of intense competition, only 2 contestants remained, Sarah and a tall alien from the Zealery, a species known for their near-superhuman intelligence. The final puzzle was projected into the arena, a massive, rotating sphere covered in interlocking rings. It was the most complex puzzle yet, one that had baffled even the best students at the academy. Sarah's heart raced as she studied the sphere, trying to decipher its secrets. The Zealery's hands moved quickly, manipulating the rings with practiced ease. But Sarah didn't let that intimidate her. She focused harder than ever, her thoughts racing as she worked to unravel the layers of the puzzle. Slowly but surely, she began to make progress, her hands moving with precision and speed. As she worked, she could feel the tension in the room growing. The audience had fallen silent, all eyes on the arena. Even Professor Zeeler, who had been watching from the sidelines, seemed to be holding his breath. Sarah's fingers flew over the controls, bringing the puzzle closer to completion. Then, with one final twist, the sphere clicked into place, the rings aligning perfectly as the puzzle was solved. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an eruption of cheers. Sarah stood there, breathless and exhausted, but with a triumphant smile on her face. She had done it. She had won the tournament. As she looked around at the cheering crowd, her eyes met Zealer's. The professor stared at her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, something almost like respect. Sarah had proven herself not just to the Academy, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. The Galactic Puzzle Tournament was over, but for Sarah Mitchell, it was only the beginning. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more tests of her intellect and determination. But she was ready for them. She had come to the Interstellar Academy of Higher Learning to prove that humans were capable of greatness, and she had done just that. In the days that followed, Sarah immersed herself in her studies, dazed and trying to avoid unwanted attention. She kept to herself as much as possible, but her anxiety grew. She began to notice subtle changes, how her classmates avoided her gaze, and how conversations shifted whenever Professor Zealer watched her with newfound intensity. It was as if she had become a piece on a chessboard, her every movement carefully monitored. One afternoon, when Sarah returned to her dorm, she found a small, folded piece of paper slipped under her door. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, her mind racing with possibilities. She quickly unfolded the note and read the message. "Meet me in the Shadow Archives at midnight. We need to talk." There was no signature or indication of who sent it, but the urgency in the words was clear. Sarah's first reaction was to ignore it. Talus's warning was still fresh in her mind, but something about the message stirred a strange curiosity and a desire for answers within her. That night, as the clock approached midnight, Sarah found herself slipping out of her room and heading toward the Shadow Archives. The archives were a restricted area of the Academy's library, accessible only to the most advanced students and faculty. It was said to contain ancient texts and forbidden knowledge that could change the course of history if it fell into the wrong hands. As she approached the entrance, her footsteps echoed softly in the empty halls. She wondered if this was a trap, if she was walking into something unavoidable. But it was too late to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The Shadow Archives were even more majestic than she had imagined. Tall bookshelves stretched into the darkness, filled with books and scrolls that seemed to be brimming with dark secrets. The smell of old paper and ink hung in the air, pressing upon her with a physical presence. A sudden sound made Sarah jump. She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Professor Zealer. "Professor!" Sarah's voice trembled, a mix of confusion and fear. "What are you doing here?" Zealer moved closer, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I could ask you the same question," he replied in a calm tone that made Sarah's skin tingle. "But I think we both already know the answer." Sarah took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run. "Did you send the note?" she asked, but Zealer didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his robes and pulled out a small metal object, a data crystal, which he handed to her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's why you're here," Zealer replied. "Take it. It will answer questions you didn't even know you had." Sarah hesitated, then reached out and took the crystal from him. It was cold to the touch, and she felt a strange pulse of energy run through her as she held it. "Why are you giving it to me?" she asked. "Because I think you're the only one who can do what needs to be done," Zealer said, his voice laced with something Sarah couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or something deeper. "There are forces at work here, Sarah, forces that will wipe you and your kind from this galaxy. But there is hope if you know where to find it." Sarah's heart pounded as she stared at the crystal, feeling the weight of his words. "What do I do now?" she asked. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do," Zealer replied. Before Sarah could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the archives. The data crystal felt heavy in her hand as she stood there, trying to process everything that had just happened. She had more questions now than ever, but one thing was certain. She was immersed in something much bigger than herself. Sarah pocketed the crystal and made her way through the quiet hallways back to her dorm, her thoughts racing. In the days that followed, Sarah kept to herself, avoiding unnecessary contact with others and becoming obsessed with the data crystal. She knew it held the answers, maybe even the key to everything that had happened since she arrived at the academy, but she was afraid to reveal it. Whatever it contained was too dangerous for anyone else to see. Late one night, Sarah finally decided to take a chance. Sitting alone in her dimly lit dormitory, her heart pounding, she inserted the crystal into the interface. The screen came to life, displaying several lines of code that quickly rearranged themselves into complex patterns. As she studied the information, her eyes widened in shock. The crystal contained plans for something buried deep within the academy, a structure ancient and massive. Its design was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, but that wasn't what worried her. The purpose of this building was to house a weapon capable of destroying an entire star system in an instant. Sarah's mind raced. This was more than she had ever expected. The academy wasn't just a place of learning. It was a fortress built to guard a secret so dangerous that its existence threatened the entire galaxy. And now she had the knowledge to access it. She knew she couldn't trust anyone, not even herself. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about stopping whatever was happening beneath the surface of this seemingly benign institution. But how? She was just a human child in a galaxy full of beings who were smarter, faster, and stronger than her. Yet Zealer himself had chosen her to carry this knowledge. There had to be a reason. As she examined the plans more closely, Sarah realized there was a flaw in the design. It was so subtle it was easy to miss, but her sharp mind picked it up. The structural safety systems had a blind spot, a weakness that could be exploited. It wasn't much, but it was enough for someone as small and agile as her. This was her chance. Sarah quickly copied the data to a secure drive and erased all traces from her interface. She had to move fast before anyone noticed what she was doing. The next morning, Sarah walked purposefully through the academy, her heart pounding as she thought about what she was about to do. She carefully planned her route, avoiding surveillance and taking paths less traveled. The blind spot was located in a rarely visited area of the academy, a repository of old equipment and forgotten experiments, perfect for her needs. She hesitated, filled with doubt. Did she really want to break into the academy's cordoned-off area? The consequences, if caught, would be severe, expulsion, or worse. But her resolve was strengthened by the thought of what this weapon could do if it fell into the wrong hands. She couldn't let fear stop her now. The storage facility was dark and silent, the only sound being a faint hum from the academy systems running in the background. At the far end of the room was the entrance to the underground structure, hidden behind a wall panel. With trembling hands, Sarah pushed it open, revealing a narrow shaft leading down into the darkness. It was just wide enough for her to pass through, and she could see a ladder bolted to the side. Taking a deep breath, she began to descend. As she climbed down, the air grew colder, the walls slick with condensation. Sarah's heart pounded, but she forced herself to continue. There was no turning back now. At the bottom of the shaft, she found herself in a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. The smell of damp metal filled the air, mixed with something pungent and unpleasant. Sarah's stomach twisted, but she pressed on. The tunnel led to a door sealed with an intricate series of locks. Sarah quickly opened the control panel next to the door and entered the override code she had memorized from the schematics. With a hiss, the door opened, revealing a huge room filled with strange machinery and glowing consoles. But in the center of the room was what caught Sarah's attention: the weapon. It was a massive, sleek, black cylinder connected to a network of cables and energy fields. It pulsed with terrible energy, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change. As she stared at it, Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. This was a weapon that could destroy an entire star system. This was what the Academy had hidden for so long, and now she was standing in front of it. Before she could do anything, a voice rang out in the room. "I knew you'd find your way here, Sarah." She turned to see Professor Zeeler standing at the entrance, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his voice that made Sarah's blood run cold. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I could ask you the same question," Zeeler replied, stepping closer. "But I think we both know the answer." Sarah took a step back, her thoughts racing. Had he followed her? Was this all a trap? She couldn't believe how foolish and naive she had been. She had walked right into it. "You were never meant to find this place," Zeeler continued, his tone almost regretful. "But I suppose it was inevitable. You're too smart for your own good, Sarah." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with fear and anger. Zeeler stopped a few feet away from her and locked eyes with her. "I want you to understand what's at stake here," he said. "This weapon, it's not just a tool of destruction. It's a failsafe, a last resort. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Sarah. There's a threat out there that not even the Academy can protect us from. This weapon was designed to ensure that if the worst happens, we'll have a way to defend ourselves." "But at what cost?" Sarah shot back, her fear turning to anger. "You're talking about killing millions of innocent lives. That's not protection. That's genocide." Zeeler's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of remorse, maybe even doubt. But then it was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're too young to understand," he whispered. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good." Sarah's heart pounded. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I won't let you do this. There has to be another way." Zeeler sighed, as if disappointed. "You're a smart girl, Sarah, but you're still naive. You think you can change the world, but the truth is, the world will change you." He took another step forward, and Sarah realized she had no way out. She was trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help her. But then, in the silence that followed, Sarah's mind began to race. She thought back on everything she had learned since arriving at the Academy. Something was missing, something that could prevent this. And then it hit her. The design flaw, the blind spot. It wasn't just a structural weakness. It was a vulnerability in the weapon itself, one that could be exploited. Sarah took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. "You're right," she said in a steady voice. "I can't change the world, but I can change this." Before Zeeler could react, Sarah moved to the control panel next to the weapon and entered the code she had memorized. The screen flashed, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the weapon began to hum, its surface pulsating with energy. Zeeler's eyes widened in shock as he realized what she had done. "No!" he shouted, rushing toward her. But it was too late. The weapon's energy field began to destabilize, its systems overloading as the flaw in the design was pushed to its limit. "You don't understand," Zeeler shouted, his voice full of desperation. "You'll destroy us all." Sarah looked up at him, her expression calm. "No," she whispered. "I'm saving us." She pressed the final command and the weapon's energy field collapsed. A blinding light filled the room, and in an instant, the weapon was reduced to a pile of smoldering fragments. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood there, breathing heavily, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had stopped the weapon, stopped everything. As the dust settled, Zeeler fell to his knees, his eyes wide in shock. "You ruined everything," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How could you?" Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I did what I had to do," she said. Zeeler stared at her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his head. "Maybe you're not so naive after all," he muttered. Sarah didn't answer. She turned and walked away, leaving Zeeler on his knees in the rubble, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. As she made her way back to the surface, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a deep, unshakable sadness. She had won, yes, but at a cost she hadn't fully understood until now. When she reached the surface, The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the academy. Sarah looked out at the horizon, her mind racing with everything that had happened. In that moment, she realized that the world wasn't black and white, and that the lines between good and evil were far blurrier than she had imagined. But she also knew that she had made the right choice, the only choice she could have made. As she walked away from the academy, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what the future would bring. What new challenges, new dangers, and new adventures awaited her in the vast, unpredictable galaxy. But whatever they were, she knew she would face them with the same determination and cunning that had brought her this far.